Rwandan genocide. In 1994, President Bill Clinton's administration knew Rwanda was being engulfed by genocide. However, classified documents made available for the first time in 2004 showed that the administration buried the information to justify its inaction. In these once secret documents, senior officials privately used the word genocide within 16 days of the start of the killings, but chose not to do so publicly because the president had already decided not to intervene. 20 years later, after seeing the atrocities of Rwanda and the blatant disregard for human life, one would think that Americans would be eager to intervene to save lives. However, Americans, jaded with the failures of previous generations and the mistakes of their own, have begun to desire the end of America's role as a global major player. They argue that we are not the world's policeman, nor its judge and jury. Our needs in America are great and come first. This opinion is so prevalent that according to a recent poll study by Pew, in December of 2013 on whether America should intervene in foreign conflicts, 52% argue that America should merely mind its own business. Fatigued after 12 years of continual foreign wars with high casualties and questionable results, a growing portion of Americans have begun to resent war and intervention. And the recent Syrian conflict particularly shows the unwillingness of Americans to send the military into another high-cost, faraway war. However, I am not here tonight to advocate isolationism, nor am I here to advocate plunging headlong into new foreign wars. Well, what I hope to do is to illustrate how complex these decisions are, and to expand your thinking about all the options the U.S. has in deciding how to engage foreign conflicts. I believe that the U.S. government should favor interventionism over isolationism in its foreign policy for the 21st century, because America has a duty to protect its citizens and its interests. In order to argue against isolationism, it is important to define the term. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, isolationism is the belief that a country should not be involved with other countries, a policy of not making agreements or working with other countries. An isolationist foreign policy argues that America should never use its power to put pressure on any nation. This form of isolationism prohibits America from using any means, whether economic or militaristic, to stop a country from engaging in activities that it does not approve of. The opposite of this position is interventionism. The interventionist argues that America should use its power to prevent foreign states from fighting in wars or engaging in activities America does not approve of. But first, in order to understand why interventionism benefits America, we need to understand the dangers of isolationism. First, I will examine the potential dangers of isolationism. I will show how it ultimately endangers the citizen rather than protects them. Second, I will examine if isolationism could exist in the modern world. I will show that America cannot escape the conflicts of the modern world. Third and finally, I will discuss the proper use of the American power. In order to do this, I will examine each instrument of national security separately. I will show how a wise country will apply all the tools at its disposal to achieve its national security objectives. Isolationism seems like the perfect foreign policy. Its logic argues that if you do not bother another country, they won't bother you. It's like the old proverb, live and let live. While this may work between individuals, history has shown that it is not a good foreign policy. Isolationism provides false comfort. I argue this because of the dramatic development of weapons in this past century, and because of the volatility of revolutions. During the latter half of the 20th century, the first atomic weapons were developed. With the power of today's nuclear weapons, and the intercontinental ballistic missiles that carry them, nations are able to eliminate other nations from the other side of the world before they can retaliate. Because of this, America must ensure two things: solid foreign relationships, and also that these weapons never fall into the hands of those who would use them. Isolationism ensures neither. Through tireless diplomatic efforts over the past 60 years, nuclear warfare has been avoided on several occasions. Examples of these diplomatic efforts are the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties and the installation of the Moscow-Washington hotline that helped ensure nuclear conflicts can be avoided. Failure to avoid nuclear war would be catastrophic and could lead to the destruction of the world as we know it. Terrorist organizations, on the other hand, do not have concerns about such things. If they were able to obtain nuclear weapons during a revolution or through a corrupt government, they would be ready and willing to use them. Another potential threat that faces America is the threat of foreign revolutions, especially revolutions in countries with weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction have changed how we view faraway foreign conflicts. Isolationists would argue that rebellions and revolutions will stay contained in their faraway countries. However, we have recently seen how the power of the social media can allow uprisings in one nation to quickly spread to their neighbors, as recently happened in the Middle East. The Arab Spring quickly bloomed into a flower that spread revolution and death throughout Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. In the case of Syria, a collapse of the government would have threatened to allow terrorist groups like Hezbollah to gain access to Syria's chemical weapons supply, which could have been used against America or its ally, Israel. America can no longer hope to ignore revolution and hope that it will quickly die down. It must respond to each revolution quickly in order to ensure an outcome that doesn't threaten its citizens and one that is fair to the people embroiled in revolution. False comfort is only the first problem of modern isolationism. The second problem comes when you try to apply it. The second reason why Americans should favor an interventionist foreign policy in this new age is because we cannot achieve an isolationist state. Our world is highly interconnected. Distances which once seemed insurmountable in the past can now be traversed in a matter of hours or days. The world economy has also developed greatly during the past 50 years. New nation-states have developed, and every country is vying for power. Competition for scarce resources means conflicts are bound to develop. And if America is not willing to respond with some type of force, it will lose credibility with its allies and formidability among its foes. The only country that is willing to defend America's rights is America. Other countries would be more than eager to quickly assume the power that America forfeits if it does not protect its economic rights. We can no longer adopt an isolationist policy, and this door was closed to us even during the 20th century. Another reason why America cannot adopt an isolationist foreign policy is because it has never succeeded in the past to avoid major conflicts. Consider America's response to World War I. While America tried to remain isolationist in the early years of World War I, Germany tried to incite Mexico into war with America through the infamous Zimmermann Cable, a ploy to keep America from entering the war in Europe. Nearly 20 years later, America once again tried to remain isolationist in response to Hitler's aggression in World War II. Although America originally sought to avoid conflict in Europe and the Pacific, they were forcefully drawn into conflict by the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. Japan and Germany saw America as a threat, and even though America had not yet engaged, they suspected danger and addressed it by trying to force America out from ever being able to fight in a war. If America was unable to avoid major conflicts during the 20th century, why do we think we will be able to do so in the 21st century? If isolationism does not work and cannot be implemented, what ought we to do? America's only reasonable response is interventionism. By interventionism, I am not suggesting America rush into every foreign conflict, but since I have already demonstrated the futility of isolationism in America's past, I hope you are beginning to see why America cannot pursue isolationism as a foreign policy. America must instead pursue a foreign policy that uses all its instruments of national security power to protect its interests and its citizens. This foreign policy is called hegemonic interventionism, a term coined by Patrick Callahan in his book, The Logic of American Foreign Policy. Hegemony, which can be defined as preponderant influence or authority, especially of one nation over another, is the only way to protect the interests of America. With this foreign policy, America will be able to protect its interests and its citizens. An interventionist foreign policy does not mean that America would be using its military more often. On the contrary, interventionism argues for the four-pronged use of power. These four instruments of foreign power can be represented by the acrostic coined by Sir Basil Henry Littleheart. Dime. Diplomatic pressure, information dominance, military intervention, and economic pressure. Depending on the situation, America can employ all or some of the instruments of foreign power. Most people tend to focus on a one-dimensional power projection, for example, military intervention. But successful resolution of international conflict usually depends on using all these instruments of foreign power in concert. As such, in order to answer the threat of an Iranian nuclear program, America might seek to create a trade embargo against the nation, using economic pressure, threaten military intervention, apply diplomatic pressure through its allies, and sway world opinion in the information domain through saturating media with the US position. The beauty of this approach is to be able to use different mixtures of the instruments of foreign power for different situations. This allows a country to avoid military intervention, where military conflict might only confuse the situation. In many cases where military intervention may be too severe, economic pressure may be just enough to make the erring nation realize their mistake. The key to proper use of dime in interventionist foreign policy is a proper understanding of proportionality. If a country refuses to cut their CO2 emissions, the US would be wrong to invade, but might rather instead have diplomatic talks to try to convince the country to cut their emissions. For every problem, there is a proportional solution. An example of a proportional response was seen in Desert Storm. President Bush offered a red line that could not be crossed. When the Iraqi military did, America answered back with the full force of its military might. Another example is Syria. Syria's repression of the rebellion bordered on tyrannical, with its use of chemical weapons and bombardment of civilian villages. But those who would take power also threatened the system. If the rebellion was allowed to take control, radical terrorist groups such as Hezbollah would have been able to capture and use Syria's chemical weapons. While the treaty that Russia brokered was not ideal, it led to the elimination of 92% of Syria's declared chemical weapons supply. This is a huge step forward. The only reason Syria has not eliminated the last 8% is because they no longer feel pressure from Russia. The diplomatic solution must be carried out to its end. Not only does this demonstrate the power of the diplomatic arm of dime, but it also demonstrates how we must continue pressuring a nation to the very end. If America does adopt and properly use the instruments of dime, then they will naturally become a hegemonic power. Isolationism, which causes the decline of a nation, must be avoided by America at all costs. Pursuing a foreign policy of hegemony is the opposite course in this interconnected world. America must take its rightful place as hegemon. No other nation has both the means and the will to do so. While China may have a strong army and an equally strong economy, they have no interest in protecting other countries and only wish to secure their prosperity. This has been recently demonstrated by their current quarrel with India for oil in the China Sea. Britain, another strong power, looks to the United States for leadership. Russia, which might be seen as a world superpower, lacks moral credibility because of their recent maltreatment of human rights and imperialistic ventures into Ukraine. Only the United States has both military might and moral authority to lead the world. America not only has a moral responsibility to protect its own citizens, but also to protect the citizens of other countries. Christians have a moral obligation to defend life and the human rights of men throughout the world. The New Testament declares in Romans 13 that the governments have a duty to be the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. As such, a government with a Christian basis must seek to ensure that governments which have strayed away from rights are punished. Our world is becoming more and more dangerous. Russia thirsts to regain its former power, and its annexation of Crimea and threat to invade Ukraine only hint at just how far they are willing to go. America must quickly learn its position in the world and how it should respond to Russia's attempts to assume the role of hegemon. America must respond carefully by using all the instruments of foreign policy, especially economic pressure, to put Russia's grab for power and land in check while avoiding military conflict that would escalate into nuclear war. Christians have a duty not only to respond to America's defense of human rights, but to pray for those who are suffering inside unjust governments. If America does not respond to revolutions, they are scorning the human lives which are being lost in them. Because of this, America must adopt an interventionist foreign policy that is willing to take the mantle of hegemony. If it shrinks back from this rule, it ignores how it once championed the weak, and ignores the cries of the tired, poor, and huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Thank you.
May I make a suggestion that you use a visual aid, and when you say hegemonic or hegemon, that you can actually just show it, because no one's going to know what that is. What do you think about that?
It's hard to follow. When you say hegemon, you mean the top authority country, right?
And is hegemon
Hegemony.
Is hegemon a synonym for interventionist?
It's a type of interventionism. That's why it's interventionist hegemony.
The one with the correct moral authority, moral ethics, is that what the hegemony? The country with the authority, the power, and the right values.
That's the one who ought to be the hegemon. However, as we see with Russia, you can be a hegemonic power and not have actual correct values.
Okay.
So the hegemon is basically the biggest kid on the block.
Kind of.
Is a hegemon the one that does dime?
If you use dime, then you will become a hegemonic power.
Maybe the top dog, but
However, let me clarify that a bit, sorry. You have to be powerful in order to be a hegemon. And you also have to use dime. If you're not powerful and you use dime, you might not become hegemonic. And if you're powerful but you don't use dime, you might not become hegemonic.
Okay. Do you think America is or has been operating as a Christian country?
I'd say that in the recent past we have started to drift away from our Christian morals. However, as we do have a Christian basis, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence in the Constitution, you can see a clear Christian basis for these documents. While I do agree that we have started to shift away from this basis, we were founded in it, and because of this, we ought to go back to that basis and pursue what we originally sought. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So on kind of the same tack that Mrs. Schreiber was taking, since hegemony is sort of a international, almost absolute power in international affairs. I mean, that's not quite a proper way of putting it, but that's kind of what it is. Doesn't it require a moral nation to be morally employed?
Yes.
Would you say that the United States is morally at a place where they can take that position in the world?
I'd say that we are the most moral nation out there currently. I would not say that we're examples of the perfect Christian nation. However, if you take China, for example, or if you take North Korea, for example, they repress human rights, they repress religion. If you take Pakistan, that's the same case. One of the things about America, though we do have poor morals when it comes to what we see as acceptable, such as our view on marriage, how it's starting to drift away from what it ought to be, I believe that we have the strongest basis in human rights, and that is really what we need to protect in the world right now.
Right. So your argument is sort of, you're saying that America is the most moral,
Yes.
that implies the assumption that there's a requirement for someone to take this role. That there's a requirement that some nation needs to become a hegemonic power in order to keep other nations in check. Is that necessarily true?
I have shown through my speech that if we do not take that role, then yes, we do need a hegemon.
I'll get back to it.
Are you saying that if we don't take that role, someone else will take that role? And it may not be a foundational principled country, for example?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. For instance, Russia is trying to reestablish its power in the world, and not only its power in the East, but its power in the entire world. In a way, you could say that it's trying to become a hegemony. However, if you look at its suppression of religion, as it started to slightly do, then we need to stop them from becoming a hegemonic power.
Okay, when you do that thing with your mouth there, when you trip up, don't stick out your tongue. All right, that's it. And unless anybody else has any other questions. How many minutes was that?